Hello and welcome to the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything fantasy and science fiction. Your host is Matt Crosswhite, and the subject matter expert is Josiah Marshall. And here we go.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast. I am the humble host, Matt, and we're joined by subject matter expert Josiah Marshall. How are you, Josiah?
I'm also a very humbled individual myself, and I'm doing well.
Excellent. And today we're going to continue our previous conversation about Lord of the Rings because, if for no other reason than, even though there's many reasons, we could talk Lord of the Rings till the cows come home. There are literally full podcasts that only ever talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
And they're fantastic, by the way. But my wife and I just finished all three extended cut versions of the Lord of the Rings movies. And so we've successfully made it through 11 hours of content. And now we got to talk about it because it's too good not to.
All righty then. Well, let's get into it. What did you find so fascinating about the movies?
I think I mentioned this last episode, but I really appreciate that the extended cuts made a lot more sense out of certain events. When I had watched them years ago in the ordinary version, I had wondered why certain things didn't happen, or wait, who did this character come, where did they come from and stuff. So the extended cut just made a whole lot more of the story flow together like it should, which was really, really cool. And yeah, and then so my wife and I were in the car. We drove down to Phoenix last weekend, or mid last week, which for us, for anybody listening, that's about a 2-hour drive. And so we were driving down, and we weren't quite through all the movies yet, but we were driving home on both legs of the trip. We were asking each other, what character or characters do you identify with? Do you have characteristics of? And then we would answer it for the other person. And so she told me, let me see if I can remember. No, she texted it to me. She said, hang on, let me pull it up. This is, I intentionally had her text it to me so that you and I could talk about it.
Okay.
But now that we've finished the series, we've got so many Lord of the Rings gifs in our text chain. So I got to scroll past all of those to find. So she told me,
That reminds me of those old surveys that were passed back and forth on Facebook. What was that?
Right?
Over a decade ago. It's like, yeah.
But it's super fun to talk to with your spouse about it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's like a whole nother level of getting to know your spouse better. When you have a movie or a book or a set of books or a TV show where you're like, I really appreciate and aspire to this attribute that this one character has, or I really felt like that guy, and I wish I could overcome that weakness or whatever. It helps your spouse see, oh, that's what you meant, because I saw it too, and I can now visualize what you're talking about. So she said that I am 30% Gandalf the Grey. We drew a distinction between Gandalf the White and Gandalf the Grey.
Okay.
30% Gandalf the Grey, 25% Gimli, 25% Frodo, and 20% Faramir. So it was Gandalf's fun, lighthearted, but can be serious, wizardy type. Gimli's sense of humor and just really not taking anything too seriously and cracking the best jokes in the best moments. And his sense of competition with Legolas. Because she had quite a bit of Legolas in her, so it was a good pairing. And then what were the other two? I know Frodo from his I think she took it to like my sense of responsibility and determination once I get my head on a topic.
Hmm.
I am a jump in with both feet, not a toe in the water kind of guy. So, and she also compared it to the like if you see something needs to be done, you
Mhm.
put your hand up and say, I will do it, regardless of how much it will cost you personally or if you have time or bandwidth. If you see it needs to be done, you just do it.
Right.
And then Faramir with his just general quality, character, and nature and stuff like that. So we got to have this fantastic conversation, and maybe when we're together next week or something, we can record what our wives think they are in the series. But,
Okay. I have to go back to the beginning of that because something flashed in my eyes that in my head. Just like, okay, there's some interesting parallels going on here with her and Gandalf. So you said you guys even had a conversation between Gandalf the Gray and Gandalf the White. How much
yes.
more was she with the White, or was it more the Gray?
I did not.
Did you get into
So
that?
of what the differences are, or how much
No,
attribute I
for her.
personally
Yeah, for her. What was more of the attribute,
for
the Gray or the White?
for her looking at me, it was Gandalf the Gray.
Okay. Looking at you, was that?
So what I just read you was her rating of me.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. Okay. So that's of you then. She sees
Right.
you. Okay. For some reason, I
As
had that
these
turned
things.
around. Okay. Okay. So
Oh,
she's seeing you. I had that completely turned around. All right. So she's seeing you as having all of these characteristics. Okay. And this
right.
percentage of all of these characters. Got it. Got it. Um,
And it
because
just
when
made
you
for a
had it to
super
her,
fun conversation.
well, when you had it to her, what made it so fascinating was that when you do look at the differences between Gandalf the Gray and Gandalf the White, there are some fine distinctions.
Mhm.
One of which is that Gandalf the White had greater powers and authority because he became the sole emissary of the Valar.
Right.
But what was interesting is that when he got transformed that way, he became more cautious and less humorous. He basically became more
Far
serious,
less humorous. Yeah, I don't
right?
think he smiled again, except to like a small comforting smile to Pippin or something like
Yes.
that. I mean,
Yes.
granted, the circumstances were very different. He
Hmm.
had a lot more to be serious and somber about than he did at Bilbo's birthday party. But
Right.
so
Hmm.
Gandalf the Grey was able to be the lighthearted, whereas Gandalf the White had to be like the warrior wizard who showed up at the last second at Helm's Deep and stuff like that. But
Right. But as you may know, he was, of course, the only wizard to actually change color. So that set a certain precedence within the Middle Earth itself, its historical context. But then you have, of course, just the legendarium. Wow, let's really give some relevance, some credence, weights to the Middle Earth historical relevance. Yes, there we go.
mhm,
But why that jumped out to me so much was because I mean your wife wore a wedding dress, and the wedding dress is white, and
mhm.
so it was there. There's a process. There's a transformation for her. Now, not to say you weren't transformed at your wedding in any way, shape, or form, but I mean to say that for her it just seemed to really go well because I mean not only do you have the visual but you could even see how there can be a transformation of character that takes place.
Right.
But I don't see Christy becoming more cautious and less humorous getting
Agreed.
married to you. I don't see that
Agreed.
paralleling very well.
Her cautious became louder as my throwing caution to the wind became more evident. She started pumping the brakes more when she realized what a foolish adventurer I am. But yeah.
Well, that's all fun and dandy. So what do you think you would take from her assessment of you in light of these characters?
Um, it was good to see that she thinks I'm more lighthearted than I tend to think I am.
Well, that's
Sometimes I
good.
really marvel that my wife genuinely thinks I'm funny because I hear the jokes in my head and I groan, but when I say them out loud, she mostly laughs. So that's pretty great.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes she'll sigh at the end of the laugh and go, "You're so funny." I go, "Really? You think so? Thanks." So, so
And I find it interesting about her correlation with you and Gimli.
mm,
Because here you've got this very brogish dwarf who has a very certain idea of what you do with dwarves. You don't toss them. You don't toss them. You don't toss a dwarf.
and when you do toss them, don't tell the elf.
Aye, and you don't tell the elf, and you don't go into drinking games with the dwarf either. You're not going to stand on your own 2 feet.
Even though he goes on and loses that. But yes.
He does. I mean, he falls flat, and there's Legolas standing there going, I feel this odd sensation in my fingers.
Like, I think I'm starting to feel it now. Is this what tipsy is? And Gimli's like, oh.
Now, to re-clarify, to restate our disclaimer, this is regarding the movies, not the books. So if you hear anything that's not related to the books, please don't take offense. We're having fun with the movies right now.
Yes.
But
yes.
I if there was a second character that I liked out of Lord of the Rings, because I already established Samwise Gamgee is my favorite. I mean, that guy,
yes.
I definitely like that character. Gimli's my second.
Really?
Yes. Gimli's my second because not only just for who he is, but I'm going to keeping with the movies. John Rhys Davies has this ability to convey a certain depth of not just character as far as an individual, but his character as far as what makes you, right? He has an ability to convey a depth of character that I haven't seen much in other actors. And so when he's playing Gimli, you get this deep-seated idea that he has an understanding of who he is and what kind of dwarf he's going to be, right? Yes. Now, one of the things I know you haven't gotten into him yet, but I'm going to encourage when you do watch The Hobbit.
Yes, that is next.
Go into the extras and watch the Dwarf Boot Camp.
Yes.
That expression. I want to watch that. Because you've got this choreographer who really he loves Lord of the Rings, and you can tell that in the way he so passionately and so physically puts himself and puts these actors and these characters into the context of Lord of the Rings. Because the boot camp, oh man, that was so good. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that even that one or some part of the documentary behind the scenes won an award. It was so good, so good. But back to Gimli, we do have an understanding of who he is, where he's coming from, and his actual connection with Bilbo.
Yes.
Not a whole lot of people connect that, but his daddy, Gloin, was part of the troop of dwarves that Bilbo joined in going and taking the Lonely Mountain. So it's interesting. So you get Gimli, who's carrying a very, I would say, prestigious legacy, in the sense that he's walking around being the son, Gimli, the son of Gloin, who went and took the mountain and was part of the dragon's demise, in the sense that they got him out of the mountain, but oh good grief, I know his name. Shot the black feather and the black arrow and killed the dragon. Anyways, he was a part of all that. So we've got that connection there. So the fact that here's Gimli connecting with Frodo, even, you just think, oh wow, this is definitely got some interesting correlations there. But when you look in the movie, you see these different personality aspects of Gimli come to play. And one of them I always thought was definitely his comic relief when it comes to the drinking game that he does with Legolas, and his random statement of what it's like to go swimming with hairy dwarf women. You just go, okay, that's a visual.
Right.
But you see the passion in him. Everything he does, he's so passionate about. And I could see how that could be argued to be a lot of dwarves, because they are generally very passionate people. You have to be, and to continue to be to grind through such granite, such rock. You have to be passionate about going through something like that. And
that's not just a Middle Earth or a J.R.R. Tolkien depiction of them. That's pretty universal, isn't it? That dwarves generally in
okay,
legend is
passionate.
yeah.
Here's the interesting thing. Okay, so if we want to dip into this, this can be kind of fun. Let's take Lord of the Rings and compare it a little bit with C.S. Lewis's dwarves. All right.
Okay.
So we've got a few different things going on here because one, there are some moments where a dwarf is referred to as a son of Durin or a son of
Right.
what the other person's name, I can't remember who, but you understood that there was this sense that they were bearing the name of their creator in a certain way. All right. And that really continued to follow them down through the generations and into the ages. Whereas with C.S. Lewis, one of the things you see this really in Prince Caspian, especially, there's an interplay dialogue between Trumpkin, the dwarf, and Aslan. And Aslan calls Trumpkin son of earth, son of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because here's Trumpkin, I mean, granted, you've got Caspian, the book of Prince Caspian is a book of faith because you've got Aslan not automatically appearing. The kids don't automatically know what they're even doing there, as they did in the previous episode where they eventually come to know. This one, it was more of a step of faith going, wait a minute, we have a love for this place. We're going to step in, even though we're not getting a direct mandate from Aslan as he does when they get knighted. Well, Peter gets knighted, Edmund gets knighted, and then Susan and Lucy get conferred their blessings. So,
Right.
But in this interplay, you see this distinction and almost this very clear separation between Aslan and dwarves. Okay. And so while in Lord of the Rings, these dwarves are taking on the aspects of their creator, in Narnia, they're not. Not only that, they're more looked at as isolationists, grumpy isolationists at that. They're not necessarily conveyed to be living together. You usually see dwarves in Narnia separate. You do have
solo.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they're more on solo aspects, so you don't see them in context of one another very much. You do have that though in the Horse and His Boy when Shasta comes over the mountain and he's taken in by the dwarves and they feed him and they give him a place to lay down and sleep. And then you also have, because let me clarify something here. The attachment that Lewis is putting on dwarves is the attachment of most folklore that you had established. Tolkien, I think, gets a little bit deeper into some more modern concepts. He ends up being able to translate the dwarves into a certain culture that becomes more them. Whereas Lewis is looking more on a folklorish level. Because even with Lewis's paintings, you even see it in Lord of the Rings, don't get me wrong, but they wear their caps. They used to wear these tight caps on their head, and it stretched out. It basically reduced in size down to, say, a bauble of some kind that usually wrapped around their neck. Okay, and you even see that in BBC's production of that would be The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, when Trumpkin is sitting in his little cart and being pulled by a little pony that's being led by a hedgehog. So there's an image. But he's sitting there in his cushions, and sometimes his hat piece actually dangles across his shoulder. Okay, so, but then when you even get into the final battle of Lewis, you have the dwarves declaring all of a sudden the dwarves are for the dwarves. Now, this is where I think Lewis and Tolkien really do meet up with each other. Because when it comes to the interplay, the political, the sociological interplay of dwarves with other species, even in Lord of the Rings, you do get this definement. We're not little men, and we're not hobbits. We're not tall hobbits in any way, shape, or form. And so they really are passionate about being distinct for who they are and what they do. And okay, I'm going to bring in Rings of Power a little bit here. There is a scene in that where you get this very distinct idea of what even play would be for a dwarf. Now, I know you haven't seen it, but can I tell this scene if it doesn't ruin it for you? Okay. Yeah. So Elrond comes to Moria, and he's finding that his reception is not all that pleasant. It's not very welcomed.
So, pause 1 second, just for context for folks like me that don't know the Rings of Power. Is it like a prequel to the Lord of the Rings?
Yes.
Or is it after? Okay.
No, it's a prequel, and then it's a significant prequel. It's thousands of years before.
So even before The Hobbit. Okay.
Correct.
This is like
it's kind of a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Kind of like when Sauron first gives the rings to the other cultures.
Before that.
Oh wow. Okay.
Before that, as a matter of fact, the first season is basically a condensed version of hundreds of years that correlate in the Silmarillion. Now, granted, they didn't have rights to the Silmarillion, so they had to pull a lot of this out of the appendices of Lord of the Rings, which they were really bummed about. And I can understand that, really. But you've got this condensed version of events that take place that lead to the creation of Mordor. Okay. That's how the season ends, how Mordor comes about. Okay. Now, in the series, though, Elrond, a very young Elrond, he is trying to get the help of the dwarves to help with him and this very famous elvish artisan to build something. Now, I'm going to leave all this kind of vague because I want you to be able to see the movie, the show when you want and enjoy it. But anyways, and I have to say, to some degree, I do enjoy the Rings of Power. There is a lot of vehement criticism about the show. I get that. There was also, I'm reminded that there was a great deal of criticism about Lord of the Rings when it came out. And even more when The Hobbit came out.
Because it's so much different than the books. But that's not to say that it isn't a masterpiece into itself.
Correct.
Now I can't say that about the Rings of Power because I haven't seen it, but like they talk about on the Prancing Pony podcast, the movies, even if you're a diehard J.R.R. Tolkien books fan, you have to admit that that there are tons of people who would have never picked up the books had it not been for them seeing the movies first.
Exactly.
So at the very least, the movies serve a great purpose, and they're terrific movies unto themselves.
Yes.
When was the last time one single actor won 11 Oscars from something?
Right. This is it is epic in the scope that it not only draws you into a world, but it requires the actor to be drawn into this context, and so even the actor has to take it seriously.
Right.
And there was some, you get into some of these debates and you go, okay, I could see how that could be, especially with how they're displaying Galadriel as a younger Galadriel in contrast to the older Galadriel of Lord of the Rings. Right. But and even then you even see some difference between Elrond that's being displayed in the show versus the Elrond of Lord of the Rings. And so you definitely get the idea of growth. And you get the idea that, everybody changes, even if it's a dwarf. Even if it's an elf, over a long period of time. There is some change that takes place.
And they are very, very, very old. So they have a long period of time.
Exactly. But here's an interesting part. That it's interesting how we put change and how all this changed over a long period of time. It puts the dwarves and the elves in an interesting little contrast here, especially when in the show. Elrond comes to the Moria. He's not welcomed very well. And so he sends his artisan friend back, and he goes into Moria. And because he's called, what's the name of it? He calls something. So what this is that he goes into a side room with Doran and a lot of dwarves, and they have a rock smashing contest. Okay. Now, Doran eventually gives the reason why he was so cold toward Elrond, and he makes an interesting correlation in the sense that what may seem like a short time to you was a longer time for a dwarf. Okay. Now, when we go back into the Narnia correlation with this, you don't necessarily see an idea of how long a dwarf could live, but you definitely get a more finite idea than you do in Lord of the Rings, because
Yes.
you see the boy, you see all the kids coming into Narnia in and out, and you see that some people have died, a lot of characters have died, others moved on, and so on. And so you definitely get that idea of more finiteness. Whereas with Lord of the Rings, it's much more, well, the dwarves are going to live, yes, for hundreds of years, but not thousands of years like the elves do.
Right.
Because you're having to look at two different concepts here, especially when you look at it and relate the dwarves to dirt or rock, and you relate elves to light. Light is going to have a slower degradation, especially when it's in certain concentrated forms, such as the light of the Valar. And was it the light of the Valar? I hope I'm getting my names right. I hope I'm not getting mixed up. But anyways, you got this light that they are being made of. And so when that light, especially in the Ring of Power, I hope I'm not giving something too much away. But when you see that light diminishing in Ring of Power, it definitely puts the existence of the elves in dire need. Okay.
Sure.
Whereas with the dwarves, you see them continuing on, but much like rock, eroding a little quicker, like you might see with water running over a stone. I mean, this is very Tolkien almost thinking right now, in the sense that you see them slowly getting older and dying over a long period of time, yes, but shorter in the eyes of an elf.
Sure.
And but longer in the eyes of a hobbit. Because
Absolutely.
even for Bilbo, 11 years. Wow, that is a very prestigious and significant age for a hobbit. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't none too lost, especially on his neighbors who's going, there's something going on with this guy.
Right.
Especially since
They've
he doesn't
never
seem
forgiven
to be
me for living this long.
Yes. Yeah. They've never forgiven me for living this long. You know, and I could hear that.
But for a dwarf, 111 is like midlife.
Pretty much, yeah. Let's see here. How old was Gimli? Gimli was actually young.
I think he was 150 something.
Yeah, he was, if I'm not mistaken. He was in his 150 years when he actually joined the Fellowship, and his daddy
was he considered a young man?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes, a young proving himself man. Now he was still able to represent. He was still an emissary for his dad's kingdom. But he was still pretty much unknown in the area, at least as I understand it. I could be wrong. Tolkien scholars can correct me, but he was not as he hadn't garnered his own name as much yet, and so that's why it was so significant with what Gimli went through, because Gimli was attached to the ring, whereas his daddy was attached to the Lonely Mountain, and the change that brought about.
That also makes sense of his brashness at the council meeting when he's like,
"Oh boy,
well then let's destroy it. Here we go."
Yeah, right.
Like, you young and experienced dwarf, get out of the way.
Yeah. But going back to your wife's percentage of characterization of you, I can see how she can see some of this. But when it comes to the character Gimli, as I said before, I just go back to the passion. He's got a deep understanding of why he's passionate, what he's passionate about, and the loyalty. Now, if we were to borrow from Lewis and say that the dwarves are for the dwarves, it would make Gimli's loyalty to the Fellowship, but specifically to Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, all the more significant. Mm-hmm. Right? Especially
and then after the Fellowship breaks up, his loyalty to Aragorn.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, that's not to say that there isn't some concept of the dwarves are for the dwarves in the Lord of the Rings. It is still there, and it's very much there, almost in spades, I would say, pun intended.
Pun intended. Being that Gimli's the only one throughout the whole trilogy that showed up.
True. Oh yeah, absolutely. And when he did show up, he gave it his all. He did not hold back.
But it kind of speaks to dwarves being for themselves. Like all of the rest of them are doing their own thing under their mountains
Yep.
in respective locations, and
Yep.
almost just hoping to ride out the storm.
Right. Which is natural for someone who may not be familiar with the story to ask, well, why was Gimli even there then? Well, he wasn't alone at that council of Elrond. There were
That's
other
true.
dwarves with
That's
him
true.
there. But when the conversation started to orient itself around this is because they were all called, first of all, because the Ring of Power had been found. And Elrond and Gandalf knew this must be discussed by a greater council of all of the inhabitants of Middle Earth in order to understand what the ring is. I mean, you read that in the book. It is pages long. And I mean pages. I mean, Tolkien really let himself go in that. But and I've heard other readers, even fanatical fans say, "Oh, that's definitely kind of an exercise to get through when you're reading that portion of the story." But so now you're understanding that there are different representatives, more than one, from each people of Middle Earth standing there talking about this.
That's true. I had forgotten that part. But
Yeah.
after the council, they're not to be seen again.
No. Now that's in the movie, of course. I believe the book goes a little different. I'm having a hard time recalling. It's been a while since I've actually read the book, but when it comes to the movie, you're right. They just suddenly disappear. You're not sure where they went, except for perhaps back home. But at this point, the Fellowship has all these representatives, and they've got and it's interesting. We say the word fellowship, and you and I had a conversation recently about a congregation and having in fellowship and being together and going, having a purpose. And you see that really in a lot of ways in Lord of the Rings, because this is where even Tolkien's own faith. Now, he was Catholic, he was Roman Catholic, but you can definitely see his understanding of Scripture, of fellowship coming into play here, and how it's absolutely necessary for all of them to come together in order to make this effort. Because
even if it was only short term and the Fellowship completely falls apart, not too terribly long into it, but
even though it falls apart, they still go about in the purpose of having the ring dealt with. Yes. Right? They may no longer be doing it as a physically joined group, but now they're going off in the pairing that they did and doing it intently in the areas that they are in. Frodo and Sam, it's taking it directly to the mountain. And then you see how Merry and Pippin end up going the way of Isengard and ended up getting Treebeard getting in. I mean, if the group hadn't have broken up, we would not have had the rest of the forces that come together and battle against Sauron happen.
Right.
Because even in the movie, you saw the Battle of Helm's Deep, yes? Mm-hmm. I mean, that was cinematically big. I mean, that was something else. And even then, when you see the scene where all of that army is passing by, the programming that they developed for that was revolutionary. Absolutely revolutionary, which is why that movie and really even the work behind it won so many awards. I think I even recall, I could be making this up, but I don't think so. There was a director that says, what's the point of me even thinking I'm going to win an award this year when I know that Lord of the Rings is going to win?
It's just going to sweep the table.
Yeah, right. I think, what was it, 11, 13, somewhere around. I think it was an odd number of awards that Lord of the Rings just walked away with. It's like, wow, just a staggering amount. But at the Helm's Deep, you see what it's like for these individuals. You see Rohan having to fight this onslaught, which is interesting because the King Theoden uses this in his argument later on to say, why should we go to the aid of Minas Tirith when they didn't come to ours? But if you take the concept of what you see happen with the trees, especially in the movie, after the Battle of Helm's Deep, whether he realized it or not, those trees came to his aid. Maybe not intentionally.
But interestingly, yeah, because they at the meeting of the Ents, they decided to wait it out, and it
Correct.
wasn't until Merry and Pippin took him back to
Wanting to go the other
accidentally
way.
show him
Yep.
the carnage that
Yep.
suddenly they're in.
Yep. Exactly. I had a very interesting political idea correlation with that, but I'm not going to go there. Anyways, slowness of decision making. But anyways, there is still this concept of the dwarf that is embodied within Gimli that gives you this understanding that life can be passionately experienced in all facets of life. Because you see him even having his way with, his effect on ladies. How on earth could a dwarf been able to charm Galadriel out of her 3 hairs? It's like, whoa. Okay.
That is
Now,
a great point that I had not thought of before.
Right? I mean, it's just one of those things you go, okay, so what would have been so entrapping and captivating about this dwarf for Galadriel to have happily handed over these hairs? Because you have to understand, even before, you already see, especially between Legolas and Gimli, this ostracizing, this distance, this hostility even between dwarves and elves. Now that harkens back even to The Hobbit, which we see in The Hobbit, because even you got the movies and you got the books of just this general animosity between the two races of people. And that goes back to even earlier reasons as to why that's there. But suffice it to say, Gimli becomes this breakaway. He ends up in taking on this characteristic of saying, I can still be a dwarf, but yet I can still associate with people who some he has no regard for. He doesn't think highly of at all. But in others, he has great regard for. And so, it's interesting to think of this even in, say, some church aspects, in the sense that I can still go and be with some people that I don't really have an ability or interest of wanting to connect with, but I can still go in the sense of being together. We can still cooperate in some way. So Gimli gets to be that visual example of how people can still get along even if they don't get along. Right?
That's super good.
Isn't that amazing?
I not really thought about any of that.
But then, of course, you've got the Gimli and the Legolas relationship that ends up morphing.
Yes.
Which makes Gimli's statement all the more poignant when he looks at Aragorn and says, "Don't tell the elf."
Yes.
When he says, "Toss me," he says, "Don't tell the elf."
Yeah, and he says, "I won't." And you can see Aragorn trying not to smile because this is really, really serious for Gimli. Don't tell the elf.
Right,
but
exactly.
He also sees the comedy of this moment.
Yes. And then, of course, you've got Gimli and Legolas in the heat of battle, keeping track of their, how many orcs they kill. And so you got them and especially in the movie, you got them ticking them off, going, well, I've got this, I've got that, 37, 38.
Yes. I love in the last movie when Legolas takes down the elephant and Gimli's right there. He goes, that still only counts as one.
Yes. That's what I was going to quote just now. Yes. So, I mean, I even in that relationship between those two, really see that people can change. Relationships can happen with two very different types of people that you'd never think in a million years would not only get along, but end up becoming very close friends. Because even when you go back to The Hobbit, you got Bilbo saying to the remaining retinue of dwarves, whenever you're in Hobbiton, and this isn't more in the movie, but you have the dialogue saying, tease it for, just walk on in.
Yeah.
Which is why I've always liked I used to say this a lot. I don't say this. I actually haven't said it in a very long time, but that gave me an idea of being able to look at somebody and say, you know what? So when you come by, there's cookies in the pantry and remotes next to the couch. Just come on in. Because it's what story can do, especially when you got something so developed as Lord of the Rings or really Middle Earth. You get to see life being portrayed in a way that becomes reflective of your own life. and you can learn and take away things from it, which looking at you and having known you the years I've known you, yeah, I can see how your wife would see these portions of character in you.
Yeah, how she chose what she chose.
Yeah. And I definitely see the Firebeard being very corollary to your dwarvish aspects of your personality.
Yep. And when we were having this conversation on the road, when we were talking back and forth about it, it was only after that we found out that Gimli, the actor who played him, was one of the tallest guys on the set anyway.
Oh
And
yeah.
so it worked out that me at 6'1" being compared to Gimli.
John Rice
Well, sir,
Davies has done so much, and I have a lot of respect for that man. And hopefully one day I'll get to connect with him, because if there's one thing I'd like to talk about with him is how do you invest so much character into a character that you're playing, having not done it for however long. I mean, yeah, you see that you can understand that he's able to do that because Lord of the Rings took years to do. But still, you just go, how on earth? So that'd be a question I'd really like to ask him one day.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I got to let you go for today. I think that wraps up our episode. Thank you, everyone, so much for tuning in and listening. And join us next week. I don't know where we'll take it next time, but join us again for another episode of Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast. Take care.